Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Institute of Managers and Leaders Migration Skills Assessment webinar. My name is Suzanne Barrett, and I'm the Institute's General Manager looking after Migration Skills Assessment. We are pleased to present to you today and take your questions on our new assessment criteria. We introduced this framework in March this year after a 6 months research and consultation period into Australian employment requirements. Before we proceed any further, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and the community. I pay my respects to them and their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. We have over 150 participants registered for our webinar today, and we sincerely would like to thank you for your interest. Can I ask for a show of hands, please, for those participants who are joining us from Australia today? You can see that there's a little symbol on your screen that's in the shape of a hand, and if you are joining from Australia, please raise your hand now. Fantastic. It looks like the majority is onshore, majorities of participants. I would also like to know who is joining us from overseas outside of Australia this afternoon. Could I please ask you to raise your hands now? Fantastic. Thank you so very much. Before I introduce you to our presenter today, I would like to mention a couple of our housekeeping rules. During the presentation that you will see, the slides will be shown on your screen and our presenter will talk you through the detailed information. You can ask questions anytime by typing them into the box on your screen. You should see a little box that says type your question here. At the end of the presentation, we will go through all your questions and answer as many as possible. If we receive multiple questions on one topic, we might answer them all together. If we run out of time to answer all your questions, we will answer them by email after today's webinar. Each of your questions will be submitted to us with your name and your email address. So don't worry, we will be able to get in touch with you if we haven't been able to answer your question during this webinar. Please only submit general questions about the criteria and the process today. Questions about individual applications and names and personal circumstances can be asked by email. Please do not post them in today's webinar box. And finally, I would like to let you know that we are recording today's webinar and we will make it available on our website in the future so that it can be watched again, either by yourself or by participants who are unable to join us today. I would now like to introduce you to your presenter, Alex Andrews. Alex is the Manager for Migration Skills Assessment at the Institute of Managers and Leaders, or short IML, and has been leading this team for the last 3 years. Alex is a registered migration agent who successfully ran her own business for over 10 years before she joined IML. Alex holds a Bachelor of Law and a Master of Arts in Justice Studies. Having worked within migration law for the past 15 years, Alex is a true expert in her field. She has assessed more than 1,000 applications in her time at IML and understands all facets of the application process. Alex is incredibly passionate about ensuring that applications are processed with due diligence and is very detail oriented, ensuring that the applicant is viewed as a person and not just a number. I will now hand over to Alex and let her guide you through today's webinar.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yes, I'm very happy to be here today, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining the webinar today. So what we will be covering today, I'm going to take you through the revised assessment criteria. We'll talk about how to prepare supporting documents, how to submit a decision-ready application. At the end, we'll have the questions and answers, and I will answer as many questions as I can. And then we'll also look at where to find help. So understanding the revised assessment criteria. So these are all the occupations that are assessed by IML. So there's 9 occupations. There are similarities across the assessment criteria. When I talk about functional managers, I'm going to be talking about all of the occupations except Chief Executive Managing Director and Corporate General Manager. So all those other occupations from sales and marketing down to engineering manager, we refer to those as functional managers. So let's have a look at the years of experience that's required to achieve a successful skills assessment. I'm just going to choose a couple of examples here. So by way of example, the sales and marketing manager role, if you have a relevant or industry specific bachelor's or master's degree, you will need to be in a sales and marketing related role for at least 3 years and in the role as a sales and marketing manager for at least 2 out of those 3 years. So that's a total of 3 years. So if we compare that to engineering manager, again, if you have the relevant degree, you'll need to be in an engineering related role for at least 3 years plus in the role as engineering manager for at least 2 years. So that's a total of 5 years. Does the work experience need to be recent? We would expect that at least part of the employment experience is in the past 3 years. However, if you've had a career break, please provide reasons, for example, maternity leave, and we would consider that on a case-by-case basis. A longer period of employment experience is required if the applicant does not have a relevant or industry-specific bachelor's or master's degree. So let's have a look at those qualifications. The qualifications are assessed using the Australian government's country education profiles. Now, the country education profiles is an online qualifications recognition tool designed to help us understand overseas qualifications. Overseas qualifications must be assessed as comparable to an equivalent Australian qualification. So what is a relevant or industry-specific bachelor's or master's degree? Now, a qualification in business or management will be relevant to all of our occupations. But also, a qualification can be relevant to the industry in which the person has been working. For example, a science degree for a sales and marketing manager in a science-based industry would be regarded as relevant. If you believe that the qualification is relevant, please provide reasons in a cover letter. You may be able to point to specific subjects that have been studied. Now we're going to have a look at the tasks and responsibilities. The employment experience must be consistent with the tasks outlined in the Australian and New Zealand Standard Classification of Occupations, the ANZGO code. The ANZGO code provides information on the skill level of occupations and the tasks and responsibilities that the role would typically include. The ANZGO code is put together by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Now, I just wanted to mention here that there are some specialisations under the ANZGO code. So, for example, under the sales and marketing manager occupation, the specialisations of business development manager and market research manager. And under the supply and distribution manager occupation, there's a specialisation of logistics manager. So these specialisations are acceptable and they may have slightly different tasks because it is a specialised role. The responsibilities must clearly be at a strategic level with decision-making authority. For the level of strategic input, refer to the ANZGO code. So as an example, a sales and marketing manager, according to ANZGO, would typically plan, organise, direct, control and coordinate the sales and marketing activities within an organisation. This is a person who identifies long-term aims and interests of the organisation and the means of achieving them. For Chief Executive Managing Director, the applicant needs to have the decision-making authority for the organisation. In a large organisation, over 250 employees, this could be decision-making authority for a business unit or geographical area. For Corporate General Manager, the applicant needs to have decision-making authority for day-to-day operations of the organisation. Again, in a large organisation, this could be decision-making authority for a business unit or geographical area. We will assess this by having regard to the position description, looking at the duties and responsibilities, the organisational chart, looking at where the role sits in the organisation, and IML's management competencies. We're just going to have a look at the IML management competencies. There's a link to the competencies on the assessment criteria page of the website. We are assessing an applicant's ability to put their experience into written English, which would be a common task when working in Australia. We would not decline an application based solely on the competencies, but it does provide us with an insight into how the applicant performs their role. The applicant must demonstrate management and leadership experience and select one competence from each of the three areas: manage self, manage and lead others, manage and lead the business. For each of the three competencies selected, the applicant must describe how they achieved these in 300 words or less. The applicant must use specific examples from their demonstrated work experience, state what they personally did and why, what the outcome was, and what they learned from it. Now, we've got an example here because we have been getting a few questions about the competencies and what is actually required. And so I've got an example here I'd just like to go through. This is 250 words, and this is the type of writing that we might expect in this area. So manage and lead others, delegate effectively. When I needed help from my staff in the past, I would often send a brief email asking them to do things such as prepare a cost centre report. In many cases, I would get this work sent back to me late and not in the format that I expected. As a result, I would often have to spend my own time rectifying the reports. After reflecting on what was going wrong in the process of delegating and delivering work, I am now using a 5-step process. 1, I think about choosing the right person to delegate the task to. 2, I provide the background why this task is required and why I delegate it to the staff member. 3, I specify the results that I need. The staff member can choose how to get there, but if it prevents me from having to redo the report if I state at the beginning what it needs to look like. 4, I clearly communicate the timing when this work needs to be done by and check with the staff member that they think it is achievable in the period of time. 5, I follow up with the staff member while they are working on the task to see if they have any further questions or are encountering problems. Since I have applied this more detailed approach to delegating, my team has delivered much better quality outcomes, and I have saved a lot of time redoing their work. So that's an example. Okay, let's have a look at the position and reporting lines. The size of the organisation, business or geographical structure in which work experience was gained will be considered. So we're looking now at the position held. For functional managers, the applicant must hold the most senior functional position, but this can be the most senior functional position in a business unit or geographical area. If the company has over 250 employees, flexibility can be applied based on the level of strategic input. For Chief Executive Managing Director, the applicant must hold the most senior position, but this could be the head of a country or regional office or of a business unit. For Corporate General Manager, the applicant must hold the most senior day-to-day operational position. This could be the operational head of a country or regional office or of a business unit. Reporting lines. Note with each occupation there are specific requirements for reporting lines. They're quite self-explanatory. Supervising staff. For functional managers, the applicant is expected to have supervised staff. This includes directing the employees' activities and monitoring their performance and development on an ongoing basis. This would exclude the supervision of contractors or project managers who do not directly manage staff. For human resources manager occupation, the applicant must supervise at least one person in the human resources team. For chief executive managing director, the applicant is expected to have directed senior managerial staff in charge of main functions and/or departments. For corporate general manager, the applicant is expected to have directed managerial staff. The size of the organisation, we get a lot of questions about this. For chief executive managing director, corporate general manager, and for human resource manager, it is expected that the organisation would have at least 50 employees. Where the company has at least 50 employees, a country office, regional office, or business unit managed by the applicant could have less than 50 employees. In this case, we will be looking at the level of strategic input required in the role and whether the role is consistent with ANZGO. For other occupations, if the company has less than 50 employees, we would again be looking at the level of strategic input required in the role and whether the role is consistent with ANZGO. How to prepare the supporting documents. Please refer to our supporting document guide on our website. It is quite detailed. We require high quality colour scans of the original documents. There's no need for a justice of the peace or notary to sign the documents. We want a colour scan of the original documents. Translations must be by a NAATI accredited translator. Identification, we require 3 forms with at least 2 containing a photo. That is actually a government requirement and would be consistent across the assessing authorities. Qualification documents. For qualifications, we need the full academic transcript and the academic certificate. Please note on our document guide, there are specific requirements for some countries. For example, with Chinese qualifications, they must be assessed by a Chinese qualification verification service such as VetAssess. For qualifications from Europe, we require the diploma supplement, and there are some other country-specific requirements. Let's have a look at the employment documents. So the key employment documents are a position description for your role, a statement of employment, organisational chart, brief position descriptions for your subordinates. They're the key documents that need to be provided. The documents are to be signed on behalf of the company. Now, we realise that this is not always possible. Sometimes people are reluctant to approach their current employer because they don't want to say that they're intending to migrate. So in that case, the documents can be recreated by the applicant and provided as part of a statutory declaration. If you provide evidence of employment in a statutory declaration, additional evidence will be required. For example, a contract of employment, letter of offer, letter of promotion, social insurance record, bank statements, tax records. Now, you don't need to provide all of those documents, but we need enough evidence to be able to verify the employment if we don't have documents that have been signed by the company. How many years do you need to go back? This is a recent change to our document guide. The key employment documents need to be provided for periods of employment that you are claiming meet IML's assessment criteria. For earlier employment experience, up to 10 years in total, you can instead provide other evidence such as contracts of employment, letters of appointment and promotion, and a resume. So what we're saying there is if an applicant only needs 3 years of work experience to be verified because that's what they need for their visa application, then those key documents can be provided for the 3 years and other types of evidence can be provided for the employment history up to 10 years. So hopefully that will make that a bit easier for applicants. How to submit a decision-ready application. So again, referring to our document checklist, at the end of the checklist there are appendices which have a checklist for each type of application that you might be making. So for example, a review application or an appeal application, there's a checklist there for what needs to be included. All employment and qualifications are to be included in the online form. If the online form has not been completed correctly, we will need to ask you to complete and upload a paper-based form, which will extend the processing time. We can turn around an application quickly if the guidelines have been followed and all the documents have been provided. Scan in your documents. Refer to the document guide for how to scan your documents. This sets out how to group and name the documents. For example, what I would like to see is all the identity documents together in one file, all the employment documents for position 1 in one file, all the employment documents for position 2 in another file, etc. All the qualification documents together in a file, and then the other documents together in a file. That makes processing much quicker for us if we can easily identify and find the documents. Referees, official company email address. So there's a requirement to provide 2 referees, but we cannot follow up a referee if we don't have an official company email address. So for example, if we have referees with a Gmail or Yahoo email account, we can't follow them up because we can't verify who the person is. And if that is the case, if you do provide your referees with a Gmail account, we're quite likely to be coming back and asking for further evidence so that we can verify the employment. The agent authorization form is on our webpage. We need that form if an agent is involved. Please don't forget that form. With the result letter, our outcome letters are now valid for 3 years. Earlier outcome letters, which state 2 years, will still require an extension if the 3rd year is required. Well, that brings me to the end of my presentation. So I'm hoping that we have some questions.
Thank you very much, Alex. That was a lot of information, but I love the way you went through it and explained in detail what we had also outlined on the slides. We do indeed have received some questions while you were presenting, and I would like to encourage all the participants to continue submitting their questions through the question box on your screen. Just type them in and they will come through to us. So looking at some of the first questions that were submitted to us, one was dealing with the old versus the new criteria. So the person asking the question said, I lodged my application under the old criteria, so that would have been the criteria before March 2021, and my application was declined. So what can I do now? Where to from here, Alex? What is your recommendation?
Yeah, so if the application was lodged under the old criteria, then it is possible to request a review or an appeal, but that would be considered under the old criteria. If you would like your application to be considered under the new criteria, you would need to lodge a fresh application. If you need to look at the old criteria, that is also still on our website under assessment criteria, so you could go and have a look at both sets of criteria.
Great, thank you very much, Alex. The questions are coming through as we speak, so let me try and keep up with this. One question that we had is in regards to the supply chain manager, and the question that the participant submitted is it a must to have managers under supply chain managers? So this is in relation to the organizational chart. If I'm the supply chain manager, do I have to have managers underneath me to meet the ANSCO code or the requirements under the ANSCO code?
So under the new criteria, you do need to have staff. You do need to have been supervising staff on an ongoing basis. But that could be one or two people. It doesn't need to be a specific number of staff. I guess in terms of the ANSCO code, you need to be careful to look at that level of strategic input there that's described in the code. But to answer your question, it could be one or two staff members.
Thank you, Alex. One of the next questions deals with the academic qualifications that applicants require. And the person asking the question said, does an applicant now need to have a minimum of bachelor's or master's degree? Alex, could you elaborate a little bit more on the requirement or no requirement for academic qualifications as part of the assessment, please?
Yes, so for all of our occupations, it is possible to achieve a positive outcome without a formal qualification. But if you have a look at the years of experience required, you will need to have a longer period of work experience if you don't have that relevant or industry-specific bachelor's or master's degree. But it is still possible. It is possible without a formal qualification.
Thank you, Alex. We have quite a few questions still on the size of the business that is required to be assessed as a senior functional manager. I will summarize the questions that have been submitted on that subject. I know you talked about it and gave some further details throughout the presentation, Alex, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on how big does the applicant's employer need to be for a person to be deemed in a manager's role. And some people are asking for, you know, it says objective number here, number of staff employed, but it is actually a very subjective measure from what I understand from your presentation, Alex. So maybe if we can provide our participants just with little bit more around the, you know, what is the minimum number or what is the ideal number of employees in an application for skill migration as a functional manager?
Yeah, so as a functional manager for human resources, we have said that we would expect the business to have at least 50 employees. But for the other functional manager roles, it would be still possible to achieve a positive outcome if the company has less than 50 employees. But it's really a case of looking at the level of strategic input and comparing that to the ANSCO code. So if it was a very small company, for example, we might not consider that there's that level of strategic input. But we wanted to have some flexibility around this because we have positively assessed quite a few applications from reasonably small companies. Sometimes they are, they might have a country office in Australia that's fairly small, but they might be part of a much bigger organisation worldwide, for example. So there's so much to take into account here. And I am happy for people to, ask specific questions about this before lodging an application if they would like to. Yeah. Are there other questions about the size of the organisation, or is that?
Thanks, Alex. I think we summed them all up. So thank you for answering that the way you did with the additional details. The next group of questions that we see coming through is in regards to the results letter. And you mentioned in your presentation that the results letter from IML previously were valid for 2 years. And then we had a process under which applicants were able to apply for an extension by another year. And we have now changed that in the interest of applicants to results letters that are valid for 3 years from the get-go. So one question here is, can you explain this a little bit more? So maybe outline a little bit more what that means for the applicant. And a question which is very similar to that in regards to the validity of the outcome letter is, how do you request an extension of an existing outcome letter which was valid for 2 years and is now nearing expiry?
Yes, so now our outcome letters are valid for 3 years. So we're hoping that will make the process a little bit easier for people, so that they now don't need to come back and ask for that final year. The process for an extension, though, if you do have a letter that's valid for 2 years, you can make an online application for an extension. It costs $80. We would want the person to upload their identity documents and their outcome letter so that we can verify who they are, and then we can issue a letter that provides the extension for the extra year. But we're certainly hoping that making the results letters valid for 3 years would make the process a bit easier for people.
Thank you, Alex. Some of the next questions deal with payslips to support or to prove employment. So the question, or one of the questions submitted, is how many payslips as proof of employment are you looking for? Just a few towards the end of the period, or do you want one at the beginning of the employment, one kind of through the middle or the halfway through the employment, and one at the end to show for how long or for what period the employee was there? What are our expectations, or your expectations in that regard, Alex, in regards to the number and the periods that the payslips should cover?
Yeah, so payslips, you could provide, maybe just 3 in a year, one at the beginning of the year, one in the middle of the year, one at the end of the year. So maybe 3 per year for the period of employment. But I would say that I find payslips less significant evidence as things like a contract of employment, letters of promotion, other correspondence that you have from the company, simply because payslips don't usually have a signature on, whereas those other documents have, a signature and a person that we could verify the documents with. So we're happy to receive payslips, but there's other evidence that we would probably prefer over payslips.
Thank you, Alex. There's one housekeeping question here. One of our participants asked if they are able to get the presentation slides after the webinar. And we will email everyone in the next coming days, and we will send out the material from today's webinar. So please, no need to take screenshots or anything. We will be able to email that out to you. Coming back to questions on the assessment criteria. So there's a few questions here, Alex, in regards to the functional manager and the matrix that we used to have previously, where a functional manager had to have 3 people reporting to them, and then each of them used to have 3 reporting to them. So the question is that still the case? Do we still need a minimum of 3 managers to be supervised? Can you explain how that is, how that has changed under the new criteria, Alex?
Yes, so that is no longer a requirement. We realise that a lot of companies have a much more flat structure than the hierarchy that we had in the criteria before. So that's quite a significant change to the criteria, because now, as we talked about before, for the functional managers, they need to supervise staff, but it can be 1 or 2 staff members. It doesn't need to be a particular number of staff. And again, we're looking at that level of strategic input, looking at the ANZCO code for human resource manager, we would like the person to be supervising somebody in the human resources team. I've just specified that because sometimes we have applications for human resource manager where the applicant says, well, I assist managers across the organisation, which would be typical for a human resource manager, but we would like the human resource manager to actually be supervising somebody who also does human resources work. So the new criteria in that regard is very different in that we don't have that hierarchy. Under the old criteria, you needed to have about 12 people in your team, and that's no longer a requirement.
Thank you, Alex. We have a few questions about the changeover from the old to the new criteria. So one of our participants said if they had submitted an application before March this year when the old criteria was in place, and they were declined based on that requirement that we just talked about with the 3 managers reporting into the functional managers, each of those managers having to have at least 3 direct reports. And they would now apply again under the new criteria. What are their chances of being approved on that based on that org chart, this organizational chart criteria under our assessment framework?
So if they lodge a new application, it'll be assessed completely under the new requirements with no regard at all to the old criteria. So yes, they could apply again. They could apply under the new criteria with a new application.
Thank you, Alex. So that's really our recommendation to participants if they have a look at the difference or the comparison between the old and the new criteria. Another area that has created a lot of question is how do we consider the role of self-employed people or business owners? How can they present, or how can they prove that they were in the role or had the responsibility of a senior functional manager, Alex? How do we treat self-employed and business owners in the application process?
Yeah, so I guess there's 2 sides to that. One is how they meet the criteria, and we would apply the criteria to their situation, so still looking at that level of strategic input and whether the role is consistent with ANZGO and all the other criteria. And I guess the second part of that question is about how do you prove what sort of evidence you would provide. If you're self-employed, you might have to provide referees that could be a business associate. If you don't have, somebody above you that could provide the reference, you could provide, instead of those key documents that we talked about, you might need to provide some financial information relating to the business so that we can see, get a feel for the size of the business and how it has been operating and, the clientele of the business, so we can get a feel for that, how the business is run. So yeah, it's very different in terms of the kind of documents that you would provide, but yeah, possible to achieve a positive outcome if you've been working in your own business.
Thanks, Alex. We have also received a question in regards to engineering manager. One of our participants asked if we could please elaborate a little bit more on the requirements in regards to terms of experience and qualifications of engineering managers. Alex, could you please give us a little bit more insight what our framework says for engineering managers, please?
So the engineering manager, there's period of experience is set out in the criteria. So with a specific industry-specific qualification, bachelor's or master's, you would need 5 years of experience which would be 2 years in the engineering manager role and 3 years in an engineering related role. So that's 5 years altogether. We would need to assess the qualification as being relevant. So that would be, it could be an engineering qualification, or it could be a technology qualification. That really depends. If the person is, say they are a software engineer, then they might have a qualification that's relevant to that. What else can I tell you? It's certainly very different from the previous criteria for engineering manager. So again, you don't need to have that large team of people under you, but again, we'd be looking at that strategic input and looking at ANZSCO code. An engineering manager needs to be managing the technical functions of an organization. So my advice would be to have a look at the assessment criteria for engineering manager and read that through carefully. If you have any specific questions, we could answer them, but that's just a general overview.
Thank you, Alex. I hope that was helpful to the participants who asked the questions around engineering managers. I might take one more question, and this is again a grouped question because I've seen this come through in different ways or being asked different ways a couple of times today. This question is about employment documents. So a lot of people have said, for how many years do we want to see employment documents, and what are the ones that we are looking for at IML? So if people, for example, don't have payslips or an offer letter, what are the alternatives to prove employment, and for how many years back is IML looking for employment documentation and proof of employment, Alex?
Yeah, so this is quite a recent change, because we used to require all those key documents. So the statement of employment, organisational chart, position description, and the brief position descriptions for the subordinates. We used to require all of that going back 10 years. But what we're saying now is it really depends what period of time you need to be verified for the visa application that you're proposing to lodge. So if you only need 3 years of work experience verified, then you can give us those key documents for those 3 years, and then some other supporting documents for the rest of the experience. If you don't have payslips, then you could provide, the contract of employment, letters of promotion, other correspondence that you may have from your employer. Yeah, so I hope that helps.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you everyone who participated today and took their time to listen to our webinar about the Institute of Managers and Leaders Migration Skills Assessment process. We will be back with another webinar, but in the interest of time, I would like to conclude today's meeting. We will get back to everyone who has submitted a question that we weren't able to answer within the time today. So please be patient. We will be in touch over the coming days. We will also send you an email over the coming days with the link to today's recording. And we hope that everyone enjoyed the session and got the information out of it that they were looking for. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact us or to email us. You can see our contact details on your screen in front of you. And we hope to hear from you again very soon. Thank you very much.